In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I welcome everyone to Class 33 of our Orthodox Survival course. It is the evening of Meat Fair Sunday, the Sunday of the Dread Judgment in 2019. We're beginning Part 2, in our last class we began Part 2 of our course, Understanding the 20th Century and Dealing with the 21st Century. And tonight's class, Class 33, we're going to ask the question, who are the people studying this question? Understanding ourselves and how we have been damaged. Because before we can study these very important topics that we're going to be dealing with, we have to realize that we are limited in our ability to understand because of the damage that's been done to us. And we're going to talk about that, or begin to talk about that tonight. But before I start the class, I'd like to make an announcement that I've written a book called The Eternal Sacrifice. The book contains the Genesis readings for Great Lent with commentary after each of the readings. This is to encourage everyone to actually read Genesis during Lent. You know, Genesis, as well as Proverbs, is read every weekday evening of Great Lent at Vespers. And even if we cannot attend the service, or even if we do not feel we have the strength to do all the readings and prayers during Lent, at least we can do one of the Old Testament readings and then try to derive some spiritual benefit. So I wrote this book in order to help those who wish to have a little extra special effort during Lent of some kind, to make a little effort to observe Great Lent more prayerfully through the actual scripture that we read in the services. So the book is a short book, just 70-some pages, but containing the passages we read every night, starting Clean Monday night, every weekday night during Lent, until the eve of Lazarus Saturday. And after each reading from Genesis, then are some commentary that I wrote to help the reader penetrate the meaning of the sacred text. If you want to buy the book, it's going to appear later this week. But it will appear for sale at the end of this week at Lulu. I publish through lulu.com, Lulu.com. Go to Lulu, go to their bookstore, and look for The Eternal Sacrifice by Father Stephen Allen. Or you can just search my name, Father Stephen Allen, and find the book. It's $10 plus shipping, and I think you'll find it a very helpful aid to benefiting during Great Lent. So let's now get to our class, the introduction. Before beginning our study of our current situation, let us step back and ask, who are the people doing this study? That is, ourselves. What are their limitations? What damage has been done to them, that is, to us, that will hinder their understanding properly what they are studying? It is like doing scientific investigation. We ascertain first if the instruments we are using to collect and analyze the data are accurate, or if perhaps through being damaged or contaminated, they might give false readings. The instrument in this study we are currently doing is ourselves, our minds, our souls, our perceptions, and feelings and thoughts. We need to examine this instrument and understand how it has been damaged and contaminated, and clean it up and recalibrate it through greater self-understanding, both through being informed, which is our job here in our course, but also through being formed through ongoing spiritual work on ourselves. Our learning in this course will bear fruit only if we are always repenting and asking the Lord for accurate self-knowledge, for humility. Quite often, when people first hear some of the information I'm going to present, they get angry, or at least they get uncomfortable, for two reasons. One, they have been conditioned to dislike certain truths and prefer certain falsehoods, though these falsehoods damage them. In other words, they've been trained to like things that aren't true that hurt them. And moreover, they've been conditioned to react immediately without rational thought, have a knee-jerk reaction. You present something and the people get very angry and they don't know why, because it's not rational. They've been conditioned. Okay. Two, these falsehoods have become precious to them because they do gratify their passions, which is how the bad guys got them hooked on the falsehoods to begin with, because all these falsehoods gratify the passions. Right? The truth hurts, and they prefer to shoot the messenger rather than examine the message objectively for the sake of knowing the truth. If I have to get shot a few times, well, that's all right. It comes with the territory. But we have to present the truth. As it turns out, we shall find that by examining ourselves, in order to understand how our instruments have been damaged and contaminated, we shall kill two birds with one stone. For we will come to better self-understanding, and therefore be better able to conduct our study, and at the same time, we shall actually begin right away. We're going to begin tonight, studying one of our historical topics, perhaps the most central and most important topic, which is the Antichrist project to create a new kind of human being. Okay. This remaking, or rather mutilation, right, of people's minds and their bodies, is both the central project of the forces of Antichrist. It is also the project that enables them to carry out all their other projects. Okay. It is both the goal and the master plan, as well as the primary means to achieve the plan. Okay. The more mutilated and weak and powerless people become, the less they can process what is going on. Okay. And the less they will be able to resist. Therefore, they more and more feebly resist the progress that's being planned for them. Part A, the project, that is the project of the forces of evil, redefining what it means to be human. A few years back, the American politician Hillary Clinton gave a commencement address at her alma mater, Wellesley College in Massachusetts, in which she announced that our, quote-unquote our, because these people never tell you who we are, the our, right, that our project in the 21st century is to, quote, redefine what it means to be human. The fact that such a satanic boast would not only be accepted calmly, but applauded, not just by the people at Wellesley, but around the nation, right? It's a great moment. Hillary has announced we're going to redefine what it means to be human. Okay. This shows how far gone the American and Western elites were by the end of the 20th century. They openly preach, now they're openly preaching, right, that human nature is this totally malleable thing they can shape for their own purposes. That they are, for all practical purposes, they are God. And thus those who cooperate with them are good, and those who resist them are bad. Okay? It's the old Frankenstein project, of course. But today, it is no longer the secret plan of the elites, but rather their openly stated program. In other words, when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in the early 19th century, that was for a small portion of the population who were literate and who were educated, and then out of that group, only a few understood what she was talking about, what she was revealing. But now, 130 years later, or rather 160, 70 years later, Hillary Clinton announces this sort of Orbi et Orbi, to the world, and everybody's fine with it, right? Now, Hillary Clinton is a 20th to 21st century figure. Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, is a 19th century writer. But if we carefully recall what we have already learned in our course, now we're going to go back and review some things that we've already learned. Going way back to the 14th century in nominalism, then these frightful ideas, this satanic project, would actually not surprise us. It is in a direct line from, it is the logical outcome of the entire development of the dominant philosophy of the Western elites since the end of the Middle Ages. Okay. You just have to extend the lines, follow the logical progression. Okay. Now, as I go along, I'm going to be recommending some outside study, both of books and internet resources. At this point, it is appropriate to remind everyone of Richard Weaver's masterpiece, Ideas Have Consequences, published in 1948. Richard Weaver was an English professor at the University of Chicago, but he was also a philosopher and social critic. And this book is a masterpiece in that it traces the progression, or rather degeneration, of Western philosophical thought and then its effect upon society since the 14th century. As I've pointed out before, Weaver does not go back far enough to locate the beginning of the degeneration of Western thought, the point at which the Church's ideal synthesis of biblical and Greek philosophical thought began to be destroyed. Weaver believes that the 13th century Western scholastic achievement is the high point, and that things just started going bad after that. He's almost right, but he's not right enough. And his not being right enough is actually huge. His almost is actually a huge almost, right? So if you go back to our classes 10 through 14, go back and listen to the podcast, or look at the notes of 10 through 14. You can review our study of the Latin High Middle Ages as the direct prelude to the Renaissance. Look especially at class 14, and what I could have humorously called the three pancakes are three errors of Western scholastic thought about the structure of the human mind, about the church, and about God. Let me repeat that. Class 14 and three errors. I call them pancakes because the scholastics, or the Western theologians and philosophers, pancaked, smushed together. They confused different things that should have been kept distinct. Three errors of Western scholastic thought about the structure of the human mind, about the church, and about God. And their errors led logically to nominalism. Weaver probably had not been exposed to genuine patristic thought. Okay? Like most Western Christians of his time, he assumed that the scholastics were the authoritative last word on the patristic tradition. So even very intelligent, very well-meaning Western scholars who consider themselves conservative Christians will still read the Holy Fathers through the scholastic lens. And so they're kind of trapped in that. So quite naturally, Weaver thinks that everything was beautiful in the 13th century, and then the bad nominalists came along in the 14th century. So read Weaver, but keeping in mind classes 10 to 14 of our course as a prelude to give an orthodox corrective to Weaver. I recommend Weaver because he gives a succinct and clearly written analysis of the whole process, from nominalism through the mid-20th century. And I shall be referring to him now and then throughout our study of the 20th century. We did a course here in Detroit, we did a course a few years back reading Ideas Have Consequences, and I'd like to recover the audio files of our recording of those courses, and at some point we'll see if we can share them. We'll keep people informed about that if we can find the audio files that we made at that time. Okay. I'm going to be referring to Weaver now and then throughout our study of the 20th century. You can find Ideas Have Consequences online. And in the notes that that are available for tonight's course, I have the URL for Ideas Have Consequences. It's you just search for it. It's online. The entire text is free online at a site called newbooksinpolitics.com. One word, newbooksinpolitics.com, and search Ideas of Consequences. But you can also find paperback copies. Remember, always, when possible, it's good to download as many books as we can to preserve them, but for our own reading, it's much better to actually have the hard copy. And you can find very inexpensive paperback copies of Ideas of Consequences. I found some online for under $10. So highly recommend Richard Weaver. So, getting back to our friend Hillary Clinton and nominalism, what's the connection? What does a dusty old 14th century school of philosophy, nominalism, have to do with Hillary Clinton's speech at Wellesley College? Okay. We can get from point A to point B by summarizing quickly the process we've outlined in classes 14 through 31 of our course. The 14th century. Okay, nominalism. What does that mean? Here's the basic idea. there's no such thing as a shared knowledge of truly knowable and immutable, unchangeable natures of things. Okay? I'll say that again. There's no such thing as a shared knowledge of truly knowable and immutable natures of things, which we can't know the essences of things. We can't know that they have essences. Names, that's why it's called nominalism, from the Latin nomina, names. Names are just tags we stick on things that seem to be alike to each of us, or rather to all of us. There are no noble essences of created things. Okay. And this was not condemned by the Roman Catholic Church. It's just kind of out there as a philosophical school. And there were even well-meaning theologians who adopted this philosophy. And by the way, I've read that Martin Luther's favorite philosopher was Occam. So you see the Reformation takes over this idea, and it begins to blend with theology in the time of the Reformation. Okay. So then we go from the 14th century then into the Renaissance. Of course, the Renaissance already began in Italy in the 14th century. Then it goes full blast or full speed ahead in the 15th and 16th centuries. And what is the motto of the Renaissance? Man is the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. Not revealed truth, not God, not nature or the laws of nature, but man. Man, not God, is the center of reality, and man will decide what reality is. Okay? And at the same time in the Renaissance, we have the rise of interest in the occult and alchemy. And I believe in one of our classes in the Renaissance, I mentioned a book by Michael Hoffman. Look up Michael Hoffman, Hoffman. And Mr. Hoffman has a little bookstore in his website. His website's called revisionisthistory.org, I think. But I've got the URL for this book he wrote. It's the title of his book is The Occult Renaissance Church of Rome. Okay? So the Church of Rome is the dominant institution in Western Europe at this time. Of course, they're being attacked by the Reformation, but they're still a very dominant institution, controlling the direction of culture. And within the Roman Church, or within the top, not the peasants or the rank and file clergy, but at the top levels, in the elites of the Church of Rome, is the direct practice of the occult, black masses, alchemy, and all of these things going on. Okay, so this is going on. So the elites, if that's going on in the Vatican, you know what's going on in the intellectual and clerical and aristocratic elites in other places. And we read about Francis Bacon and his book, The New Atlantis. And The New Atlantis outlines a very specific vision for a utopian society. Bacon is projecting or predicting that future development will be controlled by a hidden elite. He calls it a college, or I believe he calls it the House of Solomon or something like that, that controls the direction of science to manipulate nature in order to monopolize power by ruling behind the scenes, using government to attain its ends. Bacon clearly lays this out. He says we've got this hidden elite, they've got the scientific and technological knowledge, and the rulers have to go to them to get direction. And they only reveal to the rulers what they want them to know. So already in Bacon's time, this is the time of the golden age of English history, right, under good Queen Bess, under Queen Elizabeth. And already Bacon is laying out this program for a hidden elite to direct science not towards truth, right, but to power. The goal of science in this vision is not religious or philosophical truth, but the domination of nature and control over society. And so the program is all right there. Okay? And another element of the development of the historical development of the Renaissance is that the popes approve usury. Okay? Before that, in the Western Christian world, only Jews were allowed to practice money lending, and it was considered to be a sin. In the Eastern Church and in the Byzantine Empire, there was limited money lending allowed, but it was carefully controlled by the imperial government, And also, the richer you were, the lower interest you were allowed to charge. So there was always a control over usury. And because the imperial government and Gentile families were involved, the Jews did not have a monopoly on usury in the East, and it was controlled. In the West, the popes and the Western rulers tried to control it by simply outlawing it for Christians, allowing the Jews to do it, and now and then using coercive methods to stop the Jews from their depredations. But what happens in the 15th and 16th centuries is that the popes, in cahoots with Italian banking houses, approved certain kinds of usury for Christians. And usury starts getting a kind of an aura of acceptability. Okay? And what is usury? Usury is financial alchemy. It's making something out of nothing. Right? What's the point of alchemy? The goal of the alchemists, which is not real science, it's occult pseudoscience. And the goal of the alchemists was to turn base metals into gold. They're stated gold, yes. It symbolizes demonic transformation, right? But then they apply this demonic principle to finance. So we're going to make something out of nothing, right? We're going to make money out of money. Money will breed money, see? And then the usury becomes the financial engine. This limitless alchemy of usury, making money out of money, becomes the financial engine. It funds this Baconian project on the part of the Western elites. See? So it's all together, this occult religion, occult demonic religion, the love of money, the love of power. It's all right there. The whole package is already in embryo. It's all right there, just waiting to be developed. Then we go on. So that thing is launched. That's going on. And then in the 17th and 18th centuries, we have the so-called Enlightenment, which we Christians more accurately call the Endarkenment. And we discuss two schools of philosophy, rationalism and empiricism. René Descartes, of course, is the father of rationalism. René Descartes is the father of a great deal of modern thought. And remember that even though Descartes is the father of rationalism, and supposedly he's this great champion of the use of reason and against superstition, when you read Descartes' biography, you read that he hit on his seminal ideas in dreams. Right? He had visions. Some intelligences, someone beyond this world, some invisible creatures came in a dream and told him, yeah, there's the demons. That's the demons. Gave him his great ideas, right? So what's his great idea? He creates a new philosophy by denying all tradition, denying all previous wisdom. And he says that true knowledge is strictly out of your own head. Okay? You take cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, as the one self-evident truth. Okay? And then you use your brain to construct a series of theorems to build this whole house of cards, this whole delusional conception of reality. And all Western thought just takes off from there, and then they just keep building on this, right? And then there's empiricism. So rationalism that's Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, so forth. All of these men had some genuine insights. If they didn't, nobody would read them, right? In other words, the devil always cloaks falsehood and truth. They're always mixing, right? So you could read Spinoza, for example, has a lot of valid insights, or even sometimes inspiring things that he says, right? So does Leibniz. But ultimately, it's a fool's errand, right? It's a foolish project, and it's led people very far astray. Then there's supposedly opposed to rationalism is empiricism. We also say continental rationalism, because most of the rationalists were on the continent, and British empiricism, because most of the empiricists were British. The empiricists say no to Descartes. No, not out of your head. All you know is not out of your own head, but from your senses. That's all you can know, is your sense perceptions. All you can know is your sense perceptions. When you think something, you are just thinking about your own ideas, not the real stuff out there. Whereas you cannot go, Aristotle and following him, the fathers agree that our sense perceptions are connected, right, to our intellect, and that our intellect can abstract universals, or the knowledge of the natures of things from our sense perceptions, right? That's the only basis for a humane and rational theory of knowledge. And it's eminently true. Common sense tells us it's true. All the church's tradition tells us it's true. But the empiricists say no. You've had this sense perception. That's real. The perception's real, but it's totally disconnected from any ultimate reality. When you think something, you're just thinking about your ideas. You're not using your ideas to grasp real things. You're thinking your ideas. You're not grasping real things out there, not actual or shareable knowledge about real things. And remember, I mentioned John Locke in his essay on human understanding. And there's a great book by Mortimer Adler, 10 Philosophical Mistakes. And the first chapter of the book starts right off with this terrible error of John Locke, that when we think, we're just thinking about our ideas. Whereas, in fact, our ideas or our thoughts are tools by which we grasp things out there. When I think chair, I'm really thinking chair. I'm not thinking my thought about chair. I'm thinking about the chair. Okay? But Locke denies this. See? So this philosophically, this leads logically to the age of revolution. So we've got behind the scenes with the occult power structure, we've got this engine of science and usury and so forth going on, this power structure of the occult elite behind the scenes seeking power. Then on the publicly or outwardly, we've got these ideas being presented to the educated portion of the population, saying that there are no noble essences of things, there's no shared reality. So, this leads us logically to the age of revolution. If there's no noble shared reality, there's no truth that is the same for everyone, and therefore binds everyone to a shared moral code. I'll say that again. If there's no truth that is the same for everyone, and therefore binds everyone to a shared moral code, because if there's this objective truth that's shared for everyone, that truth then leads ineluctably to a moral code that's shared by everyone, right? If that is true, then ergo, this is how we must live, right? But if there's no such thing, then the only motive left for any human action is power. People have to act, right? People have potential. They have dynamis. They have energy. They want to act. They want to energize their action, right? If you're not acting, you're not fulfilling your humanity. People want to act, but they need a motive for action. But if they reject truth or goodness or beauty as motives for action, they reject the will of God. They reject a moral code. Because there's no shared reality that everyone agrees upon, the only motive left for action is power. There's no room for philosophy, much less theology. It's been said that the Middle Ages were the age of theology, Renaissance and Enlightenment were the age of philosophy, but the age of revolution is the age of politics. There's nothing left. Who cares about theology? Who cares about philosophy? There's just politics. There's just the game for who's going to grab power. There's now only politics. And inevitably, and we might say now in the 21st century, we're post-politics. There's nothing, right? Inevitably, without a religious or moral foundation, even politics do not mean anything real anymore, right? They simply become a front. It's a show. Politics are theater. They're a front for predatory behavior, a show for the masses. Okay? So there was the age of theology, that was gone. The age of philosophy, that's gone. The age of politics, even now, that's gone. There's nothing left, right? So the elites create phony slogans about equality and rights and liberty and progress and economic development and blah, 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 and so forth and so on. And they use these slogans to mask a program of complete destruction of the old Christian order and to create their new utopia of technocratic control over the masses. It's a project of technocratic control over the masses. And when I say technocratic, I don't mean to imply that it's simply science or technology. There have to be demonic intelligences at work. And we see that the origins of modern science, back with Bacon and back with the Renaissance thinkers, we see that the occult has been bound up with the development of science and of political and social developments since the Renaissance. Their metaphysics, so-called, is the utter anti-metaphysics, nihilism. Remember, we spent classes on nihilism. There's no metaphysics. There's nothing, right? Of course, the religion associated with nihilism is, simply put, Satanism, right? Because Satan is a real person, but you can also conceive of Satan as a black hole, just sucks energy in and nothing comes back, right? And the more energy he sucks, the more he wants. So Satan is the god of nihilism. And nihilism is the philosophy of the elites that control all of our institutions. This is where we are. Thus, Hillary Clinton's satanic boast being accepted as a perfectly normal expression of the policy of the leadership class. By the time she said it, people were ready for it. Why not? Let's redefine what it means to be human. Let's remake human nature. She's saying we are going to destroy everything you thought being human meant. Forget Christian. I mean, not much less Christian. Forget everything you thought being human meant. Religion, family, morality, community, nation, culture. We're going to reduce all of you to little individual atoms with nothing within you, inside of you, nothing inside of you, sacred or permanent, and we're going to shape you the way we want you. And everybody applauds their own destruction. Right. Now, how did we get to this point in more recent times? Part B of our class tonight is entitled, Getting Us to Go Along. How'd they get people to go along with this? Right? I mean, you can understand in the earlier times, maybe the elites liked this because they were in on the game. They were in on the power structure. But why would the masses go along with it? Ordinary people, if their minds are working, they don't want this kind of thing to be done to them, right? So Hillary has announced this project, or rather she's made the public announcement of what was going on all along, especially in the 20th century. The project of the 20th century. How did the elites get normal people to go along with their own destruction? Not only go along, but to applaud it, to praise it, to be upset if you challenge it. And this is what's going on today. If you tell people what's going on, they're upset that you're challenging ideas that are very deleterious to themselves. Right? They're angry because you're trying to help them get away from the people who are destroying them. How did this happen? What kind of human being have they created? What really translated means what kind of mutilation have they performed in order to damage human beings and make them to something horrible, something subhuman? Okay. To what extent are we, you and I, this kind of human being? I'll say that again. To what extent are you and I that kind of human being? For this to be a survival course, we not only have to understand who the bad guys are and what they have done to us, we have to understand ourselves. We have to realize to what extent and in what ways we have adopted the thought patterns, unconscious assumptions, language, behavior, criteria for behavior, and instinctive reactions to various stimuli that have been hardwired into us by this training that has been going on in the last century. Okay. Our masters, the people who control the official ideology, the people who have gained almost complete control of the wealth and coercive power, that is the military, the security apparatus, and so forth, the wealth and coercive power of all public and private institutions who control the media, education, medicine, food and water supply, and use this power to accomplish their geopolitical and social engineering goals. This elite has nearly total control over every aspect of public or even private life. And they have enslaved great numbers of the people around us. Not everybody, but great numbers of people around us to their passions. They've enslaved people to their passions and to the grossest error and ignorance, the most fundamental disobedience to the divine plan for human life revealed by God, the most satanic sins the most profound unhappiness, the most profound hopelessness. Think about this one statistic, this one datum. All the abortion holocaust, the abortions performed in the Western world or throughout the world for the last 40 years total more deaths than all the wars in human history. Now, how have these people been able to get mothers to want to chop up their own children? Not occasionally, not like in Babylon or the Philistines or somebody, maybe once a year or every so often sacrificing a child, but day after day, month after month, year after year, for decades, women going in and subjecting their innocent, defenseless children in the womb to the most horrible, terrifying torture and destruction. How would you change human beings to consent to this? And the most elemental loyalty of the mother to the child. So they've enslaved people to the most profound unhappiness, the most profound hopelessness. Now the question we have to ask ourselves is, to what extent are we, you and I, enslaved? To what extent are we part of this experiment? We're the guinea pigs that we've been programmed. We're the Pavlovian dogs we've been conditioned. To what extent is that true of each of us? Some of us are familiar with the genre called zombie movies or zombie books. Okay? This goes back to the 1950s. It goes back probably to a movie called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is a B movie back in the 1950s, but which is actually very instructive. And of course now the zombie movies are way beyond Invasion of Body Snatchers. With all the movie technology now, they're very disgusting and very offensive. But the zombie movies are an image of what is going on. Okay? So one by one, or in whole groups, people around us are being turned into zombies. Okay? They're post-human kind of humans. They're post-human kind of humans. They look like Uncle Joe or the girl next door, but they're not anymore Uncle Joe or the girl next door. On the inside, they've become something possessed, controlled by demonic powers, something that's part of an unthinking, unfeeling mass of hypnotized, programmed, robotic beings who no longer have real personalities, who are controlled by a central demonic will or impulse to destroy, and who are bent on turning everyone else into zombies. So if you don't want to be a zombie with them, they get mad at you. Okay? They want to turn you into one. They don't even know why they want to turn you into one, but they do. Okay? So in the movies, the heroes realize little by little that they're part of a shrinking minority of normal human beings, right? And the horror of the whole thing is the process of we're watching the movie and we see these the heroes or the protagonists. We watch them watching the people closest to them becoming part of the zombie army. So just yesterday, this is my beloved wife. I wake up in the morning, she's a zombie. You know, what horror, right? Then realizing that perhaps they too are sinking into that state as well. Am I becoming a zombie? You know, at what point am I going to turn or to change? Now, of course, the people who control movie making are using these films. They're not just doing this to entertain people. They're not doing it to make money. That's the big joke. People say, oh, they're doing it to make money. They can just print the money. They own the printing presses, right? They are revealing to us, they're sending us a message. They're revealing what they have done and what they're doing to us. Okay? This is called predictive programming. Our friend Michael Hoffman calls it revelation of the method. When they get to a point where they're confident, they reveal what they're doing. And then you do it, right? It's predictive programming. It's a certain kind of future is predicted for you, and then you hear the message so often, be a zombie, be a zombie, be a zombie, that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay? You give up all hope, and you decide to love Big Brother. And we'll more in Big Brother later on. We are going to talk about George Orwell in 1984, Big Brother, in one of our classes. So to what extent am I, and here's the question we have to ask ourselves, to what extent am I still acting like a real human being with normal human instincts and reactions and thoughts and much less a Christian, much less an Orthodox Christian. Okay. To what extent have I become a zombie? Okay. It will help us to answer this question if we examine the methods that have been used to change us. What those changes are, why those changes are bad. They're really bad. They're terrible. All right? And what we can do to reverse those changes within ourselves and recover our humanity as understood in the light of Christ. We need the grace of the church. We need grace. We need grace. We need prayer. But we also need understanding, which is why we're doing our course. Of course, the church ultimately has the answers. The church has the answers. A lot of people nowadays recognize all these things I've just been talking about. There's no shortage of people who understand all this is going on. But most of the answers are dead ends. Some of the answers are actually false answers planted by the elite. Others are just false answers given by the non-elite, people who are trying to resist, but they just don't have the whole picture. We are not going to embark on some kind of secular self-improvement or some libertarian or survivalist project to save ourselves. Okay, we're not going to go into a bunker somewhere with an AK-47 and then shoot the representatives of Antichrist when they come to get us. Okay? Only Christ can save us in every sense, both in this age and the age to come. We're dealing with demonic powers. This is spiritual warfare. Now, I entitled this section, Century of the Self, after the title of a 4-hour documentary you can see on YouTube. So go to YouTube and look for Century of the Self. And I want to thank Metropolitan Moses of Toronto for putting me onto this documentary. The documentary starts with the theories of Sigmund Freud about human behavior. So Sigmund Freud was the late 19th, early 20th century. Okay. And his theory is that we're all dominated by the sex drive. Sex is everything, right? That's the driver for everything. And that happiness, quote unquote, is somehow sought through overcoming sexual repression. You become unrepressed, right? And then it goes on to explain, the documentary goes on to explain how Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, now you're going to start to say all these people are connected. Okay? And it's not a coincidence. Goes on to explain how Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, pioneered the vast apparatus of advertising, public relations, and propaganda. In short, mass brainwashing. When you read Weaver, Ideas of Consequences, the chapter on this is called The Great Stereopticon. Okay, well, Weaver calls it the Great Stereopticon after an old-fashioned instrument called a stereopticon. This is before the days of TV, right, or before the days of videos and so forth. So you could buy little slides or photographs of tourist sites, Niagara Falls or the Taj Mahal or the Great Wall of China, and then put it inside these goggles, basically, these glasses you would look into, and you could see the Taj Mahal. Well, but it's three-dimensional. That's right. It's three-dimensional. And so it's a way of going to that other world, right, and visiting that world, that place you couldn't visit ordinarily. But when the person's eyes are on the stereopticon, that's his whole field of vision. He can't see anything else, right? The stereopticon decides everything that he sees. Okay? So Weaver uses this image of the stereopticon to evoke the image of an artificial field of vision being created by the media. Now, in 1948, when Weaver wrote the book, the media were newspapers and radio, which already he felt, even before television had just gotten started, even before mass use of television, far before the internet and so forth, Weaver's already seeing that the technology available then, what we would call very low-tech technology, already had the power to completely brainwash vast masses of millions of people. So you can imagine the power then that they acquired with television. Of course, I shouldn't have left out the movies. By Weaver's time, there was the movie, very powerful, the movies, radio, and the newspapers, all controlled by the same people. Okay. So Bernays pioneers this vast apparatus, the stereopticon, of advertising, public relations, propaganda, in short, mass brainwashing. How else would the elite get the entire population of the Western world to commit suicide in 2 huge world wars? To hate people that had done nothing to them, and murder their own people. collaborate in murdering their own people? Okay. How'd you get an English farm boy to drop bombs and incinerate 100,000 Germans in Dresden in one night? You have to brainwash them. Okay. This apparatus was used through the 20th century to enslave people to the egotistical pursuit of gratifying their passions by training them to react unconsciously to the stimuli provided by those who control the brainwashing apparatus. They use Pavlovian principles. Everybody knows about Pavlov, how he conditioned the dogs, right? And at first he'd give them food with the red light, and they'd salivate. But after a while, he wouldn't give them the food, just turn on the red light, and they'd salivate, right? Conditioning. And of course, then the conditioning methods are carried forward by Skinner and other people. But Bernays uses this science, right, as the fundamental principle, this idea of conditioning, to create this vast apparatus. He's not the only one, of course, but he's the pioneer. And the documentary takes his career as a starting point to examine this whole reality, right? So, but by training people to be obsessed with themselves, that's what they're doing. They're turning people away from, let's turn people away from God, from their duty, the country, nation, family, obligation, and so forth. You didn't hear, except for agitators and pseudo-intellectuals and basically the scum of humanity, except for the scum of humanity, you didn't hear 19th century ordinary people talking about their rights, right? And ordinary people were concerned about their duties, about their obligations, which is that because they're concerned ultimately about love, about relationship, about their place in the ordered universe of God, where they were fulfilling their true purpose. Okay, but what the 20th century does is that it takes people and turns them away from God, away from the nation, away from the family, away from their duties, their self-sacrificial duty towards others, starting with God, of course, and then focus it on themselves, and not on their true self, but on their ego and on their passions. By training people to be obsessed with themselves, and they're obsessed. This whole this age of psychologism, everybody's like analyzing themselves. Okay, by training people to be obsessed with themselves, paradoxically, they have destroyed their selves, their true selves. Okay, the self made in the image of God. They've created a new demonic self of some kind of subhuman personality. I'm not saying that people are no longer human in essence, but they are functionally, they become subhuman. We know from the Holy Father's reading of Genesis that we lost the likeness of God through sin. But now, what's going on now is a new stage where they've actually deactivated even the image of God, right? Which is rationality. Okay, so this is a very frightening thing. We need to be sober about this and realize this is what's going on. That all these people around us are being turned into zombies. Now, Freud himself said that Christian civilization was built on repressed sexual drive. See his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, one of the key books to understand the 20th century. Right? Now, Freud was a beneficiary of this civilization, being a resident of 19th century Vienna, perhaps one of the most civilized, humane, and pleasant places anyone could ever have lived in all of history. Now, of course, we Orthodox have a beef with the Habsburgs. They did bad things to us. But we have to admit that Vienna was a beautiful place. And what was good, there was so much good, even though the West had gone astray, there was so much good left in the West. And the good that was left was based on the heritage of the church. And specifically, people controlling their passions, denying themselves, loving their nation, loving their family, doing their duties, having large families, living truly human lives. Okay? So even that the West had go so far astray, especially in its elites and the official theology of its churches, yet there's this vast repository of Christian goodness left in the West, which is why it's so poignant and so tragic that it was destroyed, along with us, along with the Orthodox East. Okay? So here's Freud, living in Vienna, the beneficiary of everything that Christianity had created. Not his religion, not his people. Christianity had created this. All right? He knew and taught that all of this beauty, this order, this aspiration to higher ideals was built on controlling the passions. Freud saw this, not from an Orthodox patristic point of view, but just from a philosophical and psychological point of view, he could see that civilization is possible only when people control their passions. Aristotle could have told him that, or Aristotle did tell us that. Okay? But not being a Christian, and not in fact even being an Aristotelian, not even being of our heritage, right? Not being a Christian, not even being an Austrian, and in fact hating Christianity and hating Austria and hating the old Europe formed by the church, he simultaneously hated and resented this Christian order of life that he benefited from. And he wanted to destroy it. This is the paradox of the 19th and early 20th century revolutionaries. They are the beneficiaries of a vast repository of goodness caused by the church, even by the heretical Western church. Okay? And they know this, but they hate it, right? Because they're driven by envy. Okay? When people know that others are better than they are, they're good. But they can't stand it. They hate the goodness. That's why they crucified our Lord. That's what the Holy Fathers say, driven by envy, right? Edward Bernays inherits this program, this agenda. And with demonic intelligences helping him, he founds the modern technology of mass control through the media. Mass control through the media. In his time, movies, radio, newspapers. Okay? And then later on, of course, television and all the rest. Okay? Music. Oh, music. I'm glad you mentioned that. Very important, music. Very important. And we're going to talk about that. Now, you notice that I made a parenthetic remark with demonic intelligences helping him. Of course, Bernays is not the only one. Bernays is both a primary character in the drama and also a symbol of the whole drama that's going on here. But we have to understand, it's very important to understand that no single human being, no group of human beings, no matter how intelligent, could have created this entire program that's been going on. They had to have been helped by them. Only demons could have thought of all this. Normal people, or even bad people, wouldn't have thought of all this stuff. Okay? What kind of new human being did Bernays and company want to create? What kind of human being do they want to create, and to what extent have they now accomplished it? We shall go more deeply into this subject in our next class. Most importantly, to what extent are you and I now this kind of human being? We're going to keep asking this question as we go along. We cannot get into the mindset of they are bad and we are good. Yes, these enemies of Christ, these enemies of the human race are evildoers. But we must remember that in his divine providence, God has allowed all these things. I'm not saying God wanted this, but he's allowed it for our salvation. So we do not hate Freud and we don't hate Bernays and all these people. But we must fight their successors with everything we've got, to the point of giving our lives to fight them. But in order to fight successfully, we must undo what they have done to us. Okay? If you're in an army and the enemy's poisoned your water supply and hypnotize all your soldiers, you have to clean up the water and unhypnotize everybody before you can fight. Right? If they poison your food supply, you have to get your soldiers good food before they can fight. If they've made all your soldiers into dissolute, weak men who are going to houses of ill repute and who are drunken and gambling, you have to clean your soldiers up before you can fight. Or we have to clean ourselves up. We have to undo what they've done to us. We must be free of our passions and self-centeredness. This involves accepting some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, right? Overcoming a profound ignorance of the fundamental errors we have to a greater or lesser extent accepted as axiomatic bases for our choices and behavior. I'm going to say this again. We must be free of our passions and self-centeredness. This involves accepting some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and overcoming a profound ignorance that we suffer from. Ignorance of the fundamental errors we have to a greater or lesser extent accepted as axiomatic, unquestioned bases for our choices and behavior. We must return to being the kind of people our great-great-grandparents were before the end of the world in 1914, 1918. The inauguration, that end of the world, that cataclysm that inaugurated the current reign of Satan and the demons. Okay, I want to point out that people my age, I'm 61 and a half, people like me, born in the years after World War II, we're the last generation who knew people who were born in the 19th century. After our generation, there's no one left who knew people born in the 19th century. So we're the last people who knew normal people. I don't claim to be a normal person. I knew normal people, and not my parents, but my grandparents. My grandparents. They were still, and when I was a priest in Denver in the 90s, and I knew people born before the Russian Revolution, I realized that they had a level of humanity nobody else I knew had, except my own grandparents. They were like my grandparents. Those old Russians were more like my grandparents than my grandparents were like me. Something happened to the human race. Okay? But we have to recover this. Okay? We have to somehow get back to being real people. And because we've been programmed to be this fake person that you see on a movie screen or that you see in a TV show. Okay? We must return to being the kind of people in my generation's case, our grandparents, or our great-great-grandparents, depending on your generation, were before the end of the world, 1914, 1918. The inauguration of the current reign of Satan, which is going on right now. We're in the reign. It started. We're in it. Okay. This coming to self-awareness and finally to repentance is the first step in our survival program. May our Lord Jesus Christ, the invincible victor over death and sin and hell and the devil, may He infallibly, invincibly, absolutely give us the victory over our enemies and bring us to salvation. Amen.